The future of self-storage. That's the topic for today is the Commercial Real Estate Report, empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate. I'm your host, Chris Berg, head of business development at Abernathy Holdings. We build Class A self-storage sites in California, Arizona, and soon to be beyond. I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest today. She's going to break down where she sees the future of self-storage going. The reason she's able to do that, she's got a great background where worked for the Defense Department, did wargaming about China and Russia ending the Cold War. It's done corporate wargaming with large Fortune 500 companies. Extensive background in self-storage. Was with the Arizona Self-Storage Association. She was the COO at Store Local, and then also the president at Kingdom Storage Partners, Anne Mari DeCoster. Anne, it's great to have you with us. I'm excited to hear some of your insights. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Chris. This is a real privilege, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. You and I had a chance, we just connected, had this amazing conversation. Hey, let's move this to a podcast. And so before we jump into the future of self-storage and how and why you can speak to that, let's just share a little bit more about your background with this, wargaming you were doing, the corporate wargaming. And I think you even told me you've done some self-storage wargaming as well.
Yes, in fact, we did. Yes. Well, I was about the most blessed, privileged, and lucky kid to ever graduate from Georgetown because I was able to join a wargaming team at Booz Allen in Hamilton, and our client was the Department of Defense. In particular, the office was called Net Assessment, and the charge of that office is to look into the future for 20 years, identify national security threats, and then help the entire military industrial establishment figure out how to meet them. And so this was at a time when the whole order of the world was dominated by two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. And for many people, this is a history lesson because they may not have been alive during the Cold War. But what dominated thinking on a regular basis was something called MAD, mutually assured destruction. And it was the certainty that if the United States took a first move, that the Soviet Union would respond with a preemptive counter move, and all of those moves were directed at population centers. So any move, any aggressive move, such as the launching of a nuclear missile, would be met in kind, and population centers would be eliminated all over the Soviet Union, all over the United States, mutually assured destruction, which is a scary world to live under. But what we didn't realize is that it actually made the world very safe. And that's because no one was going to take the first move. Not that there weren't skirmishes, not that there weren't, plenty of opportunities to walk down tensions. And those things happened. And most of them we never heard about, which made them successful in national security policy, like the terrorist attempts that have been prevented in the past 20 years since 9/11. What we don't hear about is actually what makes them successful, because the victory, the power of something like terrorism comes when people are scared. And if nobody ever hears about what has been prevented, then they're not scared. That's the power of terrorism. But stepping back, we were asked to look 20 years ahead. The data at that time, which was not well known, it was not known outside of the top security clearance circles, was that the Soviet Union was going broke. And what Ronald Reagan was doing was working. He was outspending them by building a space-based defense, which would have been great if we had completed, because that would have prevented at least the second plane in 9/11 and the third. The first might have happened, but not the second or the third. But also would have been extremely useful in so many other ways and would have spurred so much more technological advancement. That aside, our job was to figure out, if we're not going to be fighting at the Fulda Gap, which is the Central Plains of Europe, where would the United States be meeting the enemy? And the word jihad is one that we learned in 1986 from Madeleine Albright, who was, she was the dean at Georgetown, and she was my professor. And that's when we learned what is jihad. And then, the next year, we were actually gaming it in games that looked out for 20 years. We did it in 5-year terms. And the question was always, what will be the risk? Where will the soldier be? And what do they need? So if the soldier was in the middle of the desert where there are no roads, how does he or she communicate? How do they see? And how do they travel? because we didn't have any of the right tools for that soldier in that setting. What we had would work in the Central Plains of Europe, but not in the desert where there are no roads, there is no means of communication, and it's really hot. It's really hot, and there are vast distances. So in terms of seeing,
I don't mean to interrupt you.
yes,
Can we just so we land on the moon,
uh-huh,
right? So we have that capability. Ronald Reagan is doing Star Wars, and we don't have the capability to help our people on the ground in the desert see, and
no, no.
that
No,
seems
we couldn't
bizarre.
use LRPs, long range patrol, which was our common way of gathering intelligence, because there was no count that you couldn't hide anywhere. In a desert, there's nowhere to hide. So you can't send people out ahead. So what can you send instead? We didn't invent the concept of an unmanned aerial vehicle because they were already used in Korea and Vietnam, but we certainly advanced the concept and envisioned differences in size, shape, and purpose. And what was initially considered reconnaissance was then, of course, weaponized. And then it was brought from science to technology, technology to weaponization, and weaponization to commercialization. And we see it all the time now in commercial real estate, the drones that take those beautiful photos of our beautiful buildings. So that started, it started really before we were using them in war games, but it was advanced and then pushed into development because we knew that the soldier would not be able to use normal means that had been used in the past to gather information.
So
Likewise, go ahead.
I was going to say, so then let's transfer that now because you've actually done a self-storage war games, correct?
Yes, yes.
So one of the things I appreciate about our conversations is your kind of starting point is, okay, where's the world going to be in 20
Right,
years? Now,
right,
for people in self-storage, I mean, these are 50-year assets, so that's maybe a viable timeline for us to think about. But a lot of times it's like, hey, wait a second, the rates are this, I got to get this thing built. And
right,
so maybe walk us through, because you did talk about 5-year increments. Like, where
right.
are things headed in your opinion in self-storage? And maybe answer that in the context of what's happening with the REITs right now. We've got a lot of municipalities with suggesting or doing moratoriums.
Mhm.
So the floor is yours.
So let's just take a minute to talk about technology and construction type, but then talk about the moratoriums that we're seeing, because I think that it's extremely informative of our view now and going forward. But stepping back to technology, I was fortunate enough to repeat this whole experiment. What will the world look like in 20 years? And what can we do now to prepare? Recently, in 2021 and 2022, when I interviewed 50 people with that question, and I was able to talk to a lot of the folks who are in the REITs in positions of leadership and ask them, where do you see self-storage? What do you see impacting our business? And what they shared, and I believe is an opportunity for us, is that smaller facilities in infill areas, in suburbs close to residential, where people are moving, are a great possibility, a great opportunity. But if they're smaller footprint, we've solved that by multi-story, but we haven't solved it in terms of cost per foot of construction. And so I think there's a great opportunity for different means of construction, different ways to build, which would also, they have the potential of solving other societal problems like garbage. I mean, imagine being able to use all of those plastic water bottles that are floating in the ocean to build with. Wouldn't that be great?
So I think it's fascinating that you tied in the moratorium piece quickly there as you were laying this out, because I just recently heard a great conversation. I'm sure you've seen, even on 60 Minutes, they had the gentleman, I think in Texas, who's doing these 3D homes. And so let's
Mhm.
talk about what you heard from some of these top leaders in
Mhm.
the REIT or other people within the construction industry in regards to tech and how quickly, like you said, you can start to lower the cost with tech, maybe lower the footprint, build up with these storage. So to walk us through what you see there from a construction tech standpoint.
And that doesn't solve the biggest cost problem, which is site prep. That's something that needs to be tackled, but we will with technology. If we have advanced imaging technology that will reveal more clearly what you'll encounter, and then use artificial intelligence to interpret the data and figure out the best way to prepare the site, then, we can drive those costs down as well. But I think it's really important that we always keep that in mind. We're an industry that is slow to adopt new technology. And we're also a merchant building. There's a strong merchant building segment of our industry, and those merchant builders are building with the purpose of selling to REITs. So we need to understand what they want so that we can, in fact, provide that product. And we also need to work with planning and zoning because they're increasingly unhappy with self-storage. They just don't understand what a good neighbor we are. They don't understand how self-storage nurtures small business and enables, and it really serves as an incubator for folks to start their businesses and enables them to thrive with them because of month-to-month leases that offer up space at a fraction of the cost of the long-term leases that you would get in a warehouse, for instance. I mean, you can store your inventory for 3 months if you need, and then end your lease. And then when you need to ramp up again, you rent another unit. So it gives those are the arguments that we need to make, and that I know that you are making and we are making in with the planning and zoning authorities across the country. But there's an interesting thing that I learned recently. I think I've shared it with you, that just as a matter of coincidence, because the Arizona Self-Storage Association is working on adding towing to our statutes and also limit on liability to the leases, we were in communication with our lobbyist, Tri-Advocates, great lobbyist here in Arizona, with the SSA, with their lobbying resources. And we had just learned about the city of Peoria's intent to change the zoning requirements in such a way that are very restrictive and in fact would constitute a moratorium on self-storage, although that's not what it's called. But when you layer all of the changes together and look at what's left, that's the effect. And so we brought up the subject, and the immediate response from the SSA, the Self-Storage Association, the national association, was, and we will side with the city of Peoria. Wow. Didn't listen to the details, didn't want any more information, just gave that de facto policy stand. And so that made me think, the REITs are very powerful with the SSA, so clearly that's what the REITs want, but is it in the REITs' best interests to facilitate or not fight moratoriums? They've made their major penetration into the top MSAs where they own 40, 50, 60%, especially of the Class A, beautiful new builds. But don't they intend to continue expanding? And if we don't succeed in preventing restrictive moratoriums, we know that they'll spread. So doesn't that actually make you ask a lot of questions about what is the REIT strategy now?
Yes and no. I mean, when I just go down to the basics of supply and demand, I mean, I can see their thesis, right?
Right. They already have cornered the market in these areas, and they don't want any more competition. It drives up the value of their asset, and it enables them to drive up their prices to the consumer.
So, I mean, from that standpoint, can you see their perspective? Okay.
Absolutely. But what about the standpoint of them needing to continue to expand their footprint? They need to continue to buy facilities. They need to continue to offer up new product, or they can't serve their stockholders. So they have to spend money, and they spend money on acquisitions. And typically, for a lot of years, they've wanted merchant builders to provide the product that they then buy. They don't have, they used to have their own building programs, and to some extent that's been experimented with since 2006, 2008, but not extensively. Most of the new product that the REITs have is provided by merchant builders. It's provided by small business people who take all the risks. And I had the opportunity just by happenstance. I was at an SSA conference, and I was waiting for someone that I was going to have dinner with, and I was in the lobby of a hotel, and Dean Jernigan had just spoken. This is when CubeSmart was adopting its new name, so that dates the time from U-Store to CubeSmart. And he said, "Come on, let's go have a drink." So we sat at the bar and just talked, and he asked what we're doing, and I told him I was with the Arizona Self-Storage Association, and we have independent owners, And he said, and we love those people. We love you because you take all the risks and you build the product that we want, and then we can buy them from you. Please keep doing it. And I thought to myself, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. We take all the risks. We take the short-term financing. We go through planning and zoning, and then you buy either at C of O or at lease up, depending on other factors. Either strategy works over time. But that had been their strategy for a long time. But now this other little tidbit of information, maybe 10, 12 years later, are they still doing that?
Well, I know that that's our strategy at Abernathy. We want to build a nice size portfolio and eventually have
Right.
public storage or somebody step in and buy those assets. So
Right.
I can definitely see both sides. They want to expand the
Definitely.
footprint. They've got money that they've got to spend every year to go out there and do these acquisitions.
Every
At the
quarter.
same point in time, if you've got an asset and you're getting, let's just use some random numbers, $2 a foot. And I know if I've got a moratorium, it's going to go to $3 a foot. That's a pretty nice valuation add, right?
Yes, but it's short-sighted. How do you continue to grow your portfolio?
I guess how would you answer that question?
I would say that I would advise REITs to fight moratoriums, because while they will work in their favor in markets where they have market dominance already, the markets that REITs compete in are going to expand beyond primary markets to secondary, who knows, maybe even tertiary, if we can get the price per square foot of construction low enough so that it makes sense to build and deliver a product that today's consumer wants, that REITs want in their portfolio. And if someone like the city of Peoria succeeds in what they know and they have acknowledged verbally in meetings is the most restrictive ban on self-storage in the United States, these planning and zoning officials will go to conferences with other P&Z officials, and they'll boast about this successful zoning that prevents self-storage, which P&Z doesn't want across the country because they feel that it doesn't bring in enough jobs, doesn't generate enough tax revenue, and it will spread. And it won't just spread to major MSAs, it'll spread to secondary and tertiary. And then where will we build?
So maybe here's one of the reasons so how recent was this Peoria and SSA
It's
situation?
ongoing right now.
It's ongoing right now. So which brings me to maybe one of the reasons the SSA and or the REITs are just going, hey, you know what, let's go with it, is because I'm sure you saw, and I want to get your take on this, is that in Texas, I'm not talking California, I'm not talking New York, I'm not in Texas, it was proposed, didn't really go anywhere. It was proposed that they were going to put caps on what self-storage could do on raising the prices each month from a legislative standpoint.
Yes,
And when you look at right now, and I want to get your take on this, based on what I'm seeing, what the REITs are doing is they are dramatically lowering their public rates, acquiring that customer, and then within a very short period of time, dramatically raising those rates once they get the customer acquisition. So is that maybe a reason why they're going, hey, you know what, because we know that there might be other legislation that could cap what we can raise these rates at, let's be in favor of these moratoriums because we don't know where these assets are going to end up if we end up having a cap on our rates.
Yep.
A cap on the rental rates, I should say.
Right. And the rent control muscle has already been exercised by municipalities and the state in California during COVID and following. And so we have a primer on how to do it. And once it's been done and you can look and see how to do it, it's easy to follow suit. It's one of the most troubling aspects, I think, of the government's response to COVID is that there was so much exercise of big government and small citizen that it's going to make it very easy in the future for government to be big again and exert odious control of the individual. So with that said, we know that there is there's a trail of breadcrumbs for municipalities and for states to control rent of self-storage. And the likelihood is that they will. We also know that the REITs are really drawing a target on the industry's back with the low price come-ons. Literally 2 weeks ago, someone texted me. He's renting self-storage. And he said, it's $25 a month. Do you think that's a good rate? And I said, well, yes. And that'll last for 3 months. And then it will double. And then it will double again. And it might double beyond that. So it's happening. It's actively happening. It's aggravating people. You never know when one of your customers is the daughter of a legislator or of a judge or of a regulator. And then it gets on the radar of the regulators and the legislators. And next thing you know, you have rent control creeping into your body of regulations and legislation governing the industry.
Thus, why I can see why they would say, "Hey, let's go ahead with these moratoriums because I don't know where these rates are going to go, and I want to put a moat around my site as much as I possibly can." So,
Mhm,
what are you hearing from a REIT's perspective? Because Public Storage manages our sites, and you
mhm.
just mentioned within 3 months it's going to double, and then like we're not seeing that with Public Storage. Just so people know.
Good.
So, what's the data that you're seeing, and how? So, like you mentioned, I go in at $25. How fast is that rate going up, and to what extent?
Well, the data is hard to find because the REITs don't share that data, but sometimes they do accidentally, and you get a little peek into their in-place rent increases. When you look at the data about what the street rates are and what the in-place rents are nationwide, it actually doesn't include most of the REITs in-place rent information because they don't share it. There's no requirement for them to share it. So
Wait, wait, wait,
the
wait. So when I'm looking at a Yardi matrix or other data that's coming out from a Green Street, what I'm hearing you say is that when I'm seeing the public versus in-place rates, the in-place rates are not including the REIT data.
They don't have all that data. The REITs don't have to give that, and they don't offer it up.
So what percentage of the REIT data do you think is incorporated in there? Or are they just maybe using some kind of formula to extrapolate it out based on what they're seeing with private?
I think they're going based on data that they have, and that's why it shows that top operators, not REITs, the top operators taking out the REITs have the highest rent, the highest in-place rent and the highest street rates. Now,
Wow.
you know that's not true, right? Because the data about the profitability of the REITs tells us that they have the highest rates, but that's not what the data shows. Why? Because they don't have complete data.
Yet they're public companies. So I mean, obviously you can sort of make some extrapolations based on their numbers, correct?
Right? Right? But there's a lot they don't have to share and they don't share.
Fascinating. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt us there. So
Mhm,
walk me back to I
mhm.
go get a self-storage place for $25. What's sort of the common metric you're seeing today? I mean, you just said, hey, it's going to double in 3 months, double again in 6 months. Is that what you're seeing?
That's what I'm hearing. Now, I don't have any facilities managed by a REIT right now, so I don't have the data to watch. I will share another anecdotal data point, which, it doesn't make a trend. It's just a data point they kind of put on the bulletin board and say, let me look for other data like this. It was some time ago, I would say a year and a half ago at an event in the northeastern part of the United States. And I was walking from one venue to another with an owner of self-storage who was also a tenant. He was also a renter of self-storage at Public Storage. And he got an email that said, "We have just lowered your rent." He did not ask for rent to be lowered. He didn't have a history of non-payment or late payments. He received a decrease in rent notice from Public Storage, and this was in California. The space he was renting was in California. And he just received it, and he was so shocked by it. He said, "Look at this." He turned around his phone. He said, "Look at this. Can you believe this?" Like, "No, I can't believe that. Forward that to me." So I hear what you're saying. I think that we don't have good data and we don't have good answers on this, but talking to people who are managed by REITs is probably the best way to go. So I'm going to do more of that. Thanks for sharing that that's not what you're experiencing, because that's certainly what a number of you know current articles, periodicals, interviews, podcasts is suggesting is happening.
Yeah, and again, it might be with an Extra Space or those other REITs, but for
Right.
Public Storage with our
Mhm.
properties, that is not what we're seeing. I mean, we're seeing increases, but not every 3 months. It's
Yeah,
definitely not doubling.
yeah.
So anyways, for what that's worth, I don't want to disclose, too
Mhm,
much information there,
mhm.
but so let's back up for a second and
Well,
let's
can I ask
pretend.
you a question first? Did you
Yeah.
go to the financial summit in New York around the first of the year?
No, I didn't know. I thought I need to go.
Yeah, well, there was a panel. All the REITs were represented on the panel, and they were talking about how successful their policy of in place rental increases, rent rate increases is, and how it's contributing to NOI, which obviously contributes also to asset value, and how they intend to increase this very aggressive policy throughout the rest of the year, this aggressive best practice, and they encouraged the entire industry to do so. Exactly what we're talking about right now. So publicly, they're saying do it.
Oh yeah, I mean there's no doubt, and I think that's the big battle right now is because the REITs have got. I mean, I saw the other day, not the other day, but a few months ago when the whole life storage
Mhm.
situation took place, where people were starting to say, "Hey, do we need to break this up? Is it a monopoly, right? I mean, is there an opportunity here for us to look at these smaller operators and go, we don't have any more power in the situation?" So I'm not suggesting that, but I thought it was an interesting thesis on some of these smaller operators parts. What say you?
Well, when 80% of facilities are still owned by independents, I don't think you can make that argument. 65% of them are owned by small businesses. So it's one industry in the United States where, although consolidation of ownership is happening, it still hasn't dominated the industry like it has other sectors of commercial real estate and many other industries. Cosmetics and self-storage are two industries which still enjoy a tremendous number of brands, a tremendous diversification of ownership. And it's an opportunity for small businesses to thrive, especially in self-storage, because the barriers to entry are so low. No special education, no particular licenses, just a business license. That the capital stack is something that can be put together. It's a little tougher now, but those times will change.
And I guess my point is it just shows the tension, right, between some of these smaller operators and the big REITs that's actually
Right,
taking
right.
place in the conversation.
And the
So,
press that's coming out is from smaller operators who are saying, "Stop putting a target on our back."
so let's back up for a minute. Let's pretend that I am a city council person or part of a planning commission. You want to get your self-storage site in my city. And I'm like, look, you don't employ anybody. It doesn't really bring many taxes. No, I don't want this. I don't need this. What's your rebuttal to that? How are you going to sell me on why I should allow you to build self-storage in my city?
Well, if I were going to P&Z, I would have with me a case study on the power of self-storage as a small business incubator. And I know that those numbers are hard to generate, but I believe it's possible, especially if you can show that. I mean, suppose you have a facility in which 30% of your customers are commercial and they're small businesses. And then you calculate, just use the data in the area, how many people are employed by those small businesses. In the United States, small business still is the major employer of people and the major engine of economic growth in the United States. So use those arguments to show that by enabling these businesses to use self-storage to help their businesses thrive, we have a multiplicative effect throughout your community. So if you want economic growth to be curtailed in your community, then curtail self-storage. But if you want to promote that economic growth, which is what your planning documents and your vision suggest, then allow self-storage to continue to help these businesses thrive. And oh, by the way, we're a great neighbor. We don't bring a lot of cars in. We don't make a lot of noise. We don't bother the neighbors around us. We have good security and good lighting, which actually enhances the safety and security of all of the businesses and of all the property around us. We have a low crime rate. I would go through those arguments about being a good neighbor, and I would put it into numbers in terms of what is the multiplicative effect of how we help small businesses grow and thrive. What say you?
Well, first, do you have any data on that? And the reason I'm asking is back in North Dakota, we'd always talk about the power of putting a dollar inside a farmer's hands because for every dollar a farmer spent, it was incredible.
Yes,
The
yes.
multiplicative effect of like 10x,
Mhm.
right? So people were like, hey, we
Uh-huh.
want to put as much money and money dollars in farmers' hands as we can because they got to go buy equipment. They're going to go buy seed. And all of a sudden it just, whew. So do you have any data to support that or?
That's not data that I pulled together. It's there. Maybe I should. Maybe that's what I should do. Develop a case study to show the multiplicative power of every dollar spent on self-storage rent by a business.
If we can support you in that, let me know because I think that
Thank
would be
you.
a fantastic study
Thank you. Yeah.
to go figure that out. Especially because I just remember how much people, sometimes people would beat up on farmers back home, but then when you start
Right.
to understand the economic impact, it was like, okay, I'm probably not going to say anything else right
Right.
now.
Right. And it's not evident. It's something that we have to make evident. Uh, you know, People feel like there's self-storage going up everywhere, but when you look at how many restaurants there are 800,000 restaurants in the United States. There are only, 50, 55,000 self-storage facilities. even though you can hardly drive anywhere in the United States without seeing self-storage, especially if you're in the self-storage facility, we're not everywhere. And it's not something that can go everywhere like apartments. Pretty much, you can put apartments in many more places than you can put self-storage. But self-storage in the past 10 years, because of the attention from Wall Street, has developed some very sophisticated tools. And those tools are self-regulating. We know what is the supply per square foot. We know what the rent is per square foot. We know how many housetops are there. We know what the income of those housetops is. We know what our, secret sauce is, our magic formula for how those numbers need to come together to spell opportunity for self-storage. And because we have all of that data, and it's increasingly good, solid, reliable data, we make fewer mistakes about where to build and what. Now, there's always, the person who has the land and says, oh, I'm going to build self-storage on it, and doesn't get a feasibility study and may contribute to, not the best development, but those are fewer than they were in the past. I think that overall, the development, the approach to development is much smarter, much more sophisticated. And we have the REITs and Wall Street to thank for that. There are a lot of ways in which the REITs and Wall Street have done the heavy lifting for us. That way, in particular, by becoming a darling of Wall Street. Wall Street demands data. It was very, very difficult to collect data in 2010, 11, 12, 13, but it got a lot easier when self-storage went from, what is self-storage to, self-storage, which is the experience that I had with everybody I know, because before a certain point, everyone was like, you're in what? And then after that point, when we became the darling of Wall Street, everybody was interested because suddenly self-storage was sexy. And with that spotlight came data. It was a demand for data, and that demand was filled, and it was much easier to gather that data. It's still, it's still growing. There are still owner operators who try to keep their data to themselves, not understanding that by sharing data, it's good for the entire industry, and it's good for you as an independent owner. But the message is getting out. The lesson is being felt and learned, and that'll continue to improve.
Well, and sometimes too, the more obscure things are and the less data, it obviously creates more opportunity for more alpha. So I think there's kind of a give and take there if you're an investor, at least.
Yeah.
I want to get to the secret sauce piece you talked about in a moment, but first, let's go back to the city council planning commission situation. How much of the conversation or sales pitch, if you will, to the city is also because now that housing becomes so expensive, people are living in more multifamily or smaller homes. They need the self-storage. And if you're a multifamily developer, I don't want a bunch of stuff strewn all over my patios or my driveways. Is that part of the sales pitch as well, to say, hey, look, these are very complementary to have multifamily next to self-storage. Self-storage can help keep these properties looking clean, which makes your city look beautiful. Is that
Right.
part of the pitch?
And the good thing is that we can bring data to bear specifically on that, because the Self-Storage Association's demand study in 2023 shows by generation who's using storage and for what, because they asked all of those questions. And so it's very clear that for Gen Z and millennials, they're using self-storage as an extension of their home. Older generations use self-storage to store things they're not using at the present time. Memories. Largely, they're storing memories. They don't visit their memories. But if you're storing something that's an extension of your home and your lifestyle, if it's an extra closet, you're visiting more frequently, and you want it to be conveniently located. You want to get your kayak twice a month to go and use it, but you can't store it on your balcony because it's not permitted. And you want to use your how about the soccer equipment, the net and all of that. You're going to break it down, and every time you want to use it and stick it in the back of the trunk or the side, no, you're going to put it in self-storage because it's a lot easier to access and use. Those are some great commercials that Extra Space did on that particular one. But yeah, I think that's a strong argument. And the good news is that the data is there. And so you can come up with some really great graphs and charts to show this is legit. Do these people live in your environment? Yes, they do. They're within the boundaries of your municipality, this is a growing segment of your population, and they are demanding space. There is demand for this space. So by having it conveniently located for them, you're an even more attractive place to live. If they have to go 20 miles to get self-storage, well, are they going to live there? Are they more inclined to live there because they can access this space that they're using as an extension of their home?
Let's get into the special sauce that you mentioned. Again, you've got an extensive background in self-storage. I'm curious, based on your experience, if you were going to do development, what are the key metrics that you're looking at to go, okay, I have got a very high probability, like from a two-prong perspective. I need these specific metrics to match my buy box, to mitigate risk, and to give me the highest probability for success.
Right. Well, you look for states that are business friendly, and so there are places that you don't consider, and I know that you are considering them, so I'm not going to name them. But typically, if you're new to self storage and you're deciding where you're going to invest, I have seen, and I think it's a wise strategy, people being state agnostic, so that they can focus on areas that meet their buy box regardless of state lines. Now, once you find one, you want to concentrate them geographically. So you have to check out the entire environment, whether it's, uh, I'm not even going to name any because I mean, you know where the popular places are, and probably everyone listening does, but there are up and coming sites as well. And what works for one person doesn't work for another, but there are certainly um, numbers in terms of number of households and poverty, crime, population, uh, property values that tell you, is this a thriving community? Is progress happening? Is economic growth happening? That gives me the opportunity to raise rents. If you're doing an acquisition, there are other things you look at. Are there aspects in which operations have not been maximized? Do they have an inadequate digital footprint? Do they not enable the consumer? Do they not meet today's Amazon trained consumers' expectations to be able to select a unit online, to rent it online, to pay for it online, to sign the lease, to buy the boxes and tape, to get the access code because they're in bed and it's 10 o'clock at night or midnight, and they're actually going to go pick up a truck tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock that they haven't rented. And they're going to fill their truck and drive it over to your place, and they're going to just expect to be able to drive right in because they've already rented and have the access code. Now, if you can meet that demand, that's great. If you can find a facility that doesn't do it, then you can add that with technology. Is that the question you're answering, or did I miss the mark there?
Kind of. I was just curious if you said, "Hey, Chris, you know what? Like for example, we've got a certain buy box, right?
Mhm.
But if there were some specific metrics, you're like, these are the one, two, three things that I really focus on, and when I know that these things meet what I'm looking for, the
Mhm.
probability of this site having a tremendous amount of success is, 99% or 95
Right,
or something like
right, right. And those are things that people keep very safely guarded.
that."
Those are trade secrets that, we smile and nod about, but KPIs that aren't, typically shared, but they have to do with rooftops, businesses, uh, uh, property values, growth, economic growth, unemployment rates, crime rates. All of those things impact your ability to conduct a thriving business.
All right, I'm going to be respectful of your time. We've actually gone over than what I
Have
anticipated. So
we? Time
yeah,
flies.
time flies and you're having fun. So I want to give you a chance to share the last word. And if people want to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Oh, certainly. So I reach out to me at my email address, which is my name at gmail.com, Anne Mari DeCoster at gmail.com. I think it's up here, so it's easy to find. And I don't have my phone number up. We could put it on on an aftermath if you'd like to. But I love self storage. It's an industry of people who really enjoy what they're doing. The co-opetition that I observe is wonderful. We
Good
compete
word.
within 1, 3, and 5 miles, but beyond that, we're really not in competition. So we can help each other, which I really enjoy. That's a spirit of camaraderie that I love in the industry. And I've been in this industry focusing on it for over 20 years. and have helped folks go from development, concept to exit, including sales to REITs, with development in every step through the whole magic of operations. You know, you can promise the world, but the real trick is what happens from closing to closing. When you close on an acquisition and when you close on the sale, that's where you make good on your pro forma. That's where you make good on your promises. So that's part of what I really enjoy. But the thing that I like the most is research, analysis, synthesis, develop a plan, present the plan, and then put the plan in motion for new products, new developments, new services, new companies. And so I love to design, develop, and deliver new things. If you need help on any of those things, please let me know.
And great stuff. I'm hoping that you and or the California Self-Storage Association or the Arizona Self-Storage Association or many of them will take some clips from this today and start sending it out to municipalities, planning commissions, city, council people as well, because I think you did a really nice job talking about the impact of these small businesses and how self-storage can be such a great incubator to those businesses and industries, and then obviously the multiplier effect for the dollar spent within self-storage in the community. So great job. Thank you very much. So I know we'll do this again in the future, and keep up the great work. Okay.
Thank you. And I appreciate what you're doing for the industry by sharing the thoughts of so many thought leaders. Thank you very much for the podcast.
I appreciate it. This is the Commercial Real Estate Report. I'm your host, Chris Berg. Please share this with friends, colleagues, and I will say with other city and planning commissions as well. We'll do this again soon. Thank you.